Some fans kind of imagined that in the 60s, to be a woman working in comics, that they throw the TV show Mad Men as an example of what it may have been like. Have you seen that show, and would you say that's correct?
One of my favorites. I binge watched it. um, yes, that is so correct. It really is. Men, well, you probably heard this because I've told this story many times. Erwin Donnenfeld was the vice president. He did hiring and firing mostly. And when I became the editor, I wanted to get more money. So I said, could I have a raise? And he said, Barbara, you live with your mother. You don't have any expenses. And you know, after a while, you're so used to being talked down to that you absolutely go along, because I didn't have anyone to support or anything. And he wouldn't give me the raise. He gave me a raise in my rate for writing, but that didn't amount to anything.
Also expressed there were definitely some people at National that you described as basically evil.
I saw it firsthand. I shared an office with Nelson Bridwell, Nelson Bridwell, and Jack Miller, and I was the third person in that office. And when Mort came in, Mort would torture poor Nelson. For no reason at all, he made him miserable. And the poor man was a sick man to begin with, Nelson. So he had to take all of that because he loved the characters so much. He loved Superman so much. He was like the be all and end all of who Superman was, what his weaknesses were, what happened in a comic book when it first came out. He knew all the origins. And I don't know why Mort did that, but Mort did that to everybody. He was not a nice person.
We interviewed his son, and his son put it like, well, for Mort Weisinger, if the person stood up for themselves, then he would then back off after that. Yeah. But if they didn't, he kept pushing and pushing and tormenting. It was a weird...
Right. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And if you didn't have that strength to stand up to it, you were just crushed like a bug. I remember Jack Miller used to write for the other side, and he could sit down and do a script so quickly and so accurately. It was amazing to me. And he had a background of being a playwright, and he directed plays. So he was very focused on what he had to do, knew how to hit all the right places. And he would hand in a script and he would go down the hall. And sometimes he would come back and say, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Did you have regular interactions with them?
Jack Liebowitz, you saw coming and going. He didn't really, he wasn't an interactive guy with anybody, really, that I can remember. I don't think he was aware of the people that were working for him. I think he was lucky with Simon and Siegel. No, Schuster and Siegel, sorry. He really stepped in shit with that. And I think his life was blessed.
Yeah.
He had custom-made suits, beautiful,
Yeah, and he lived for like 100 years or something like that. I mean, he was fine all the way to the end, yes.
What about Donnenfeld?
Well, Erwin Donnenfeld was very hands-on. He was there a lot. He was in the halls. He was yelling at people, get this done, don't.
And I think the listeners should know that Erwin Donnenfeld is the son of Harry Donnenfeld, who was the guy that helped create DC Comics with Wheeler Nicholson and those guys. And Erwin was the son, and you're saying he was a hands-on guy after his dad stepped out of the picture. That's cool.
You saw him in his shirt sleeves. I mean, it seemed like when there were meetings, creative meetings or whatever, everybody piled into his office. So I think he was more aware of what was going on than Mr. Leibowitz.
Well, Saul Harrison, what was your impression of him?
Saul was delightful. I love Saul. He was like having an uncle in that place. He had ideas that were coming out of his ears. Mm-hmm. And he just was a tremendous go-getter. you know, he wasn't afraid to experiment, and he wasn't afraid to, what's the word? He was just creative. And I think he's the one who came up with the idea for Teen Beam.
Was Julius Schwartz, first of all, a nicer editor than Mort? And did they have a difference in styles and how they would approach things?
I think Julie was a more, he recognized that people could do stuff. And he, you know, I think he respected the fact that they could write and the drawing. He respected all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it was easier for him to work with people because he didn't have to eat them alive. You know, he brought his own lunch, didn't have to eat them. Jack
Schiff, what was your impression of Jack Schiff? It sounds like you've mentioned him before.
Jack was lovely. He was on the other side of the bullpen, and Jack was sick at the time that I knew him, and so he was very strong and very powerful, but he was not feeling himself. And he and Saul kind of had a little head battle going.
Oh, okay.
Because Saul came up with ideas, he wasn't afraid to voice them. And I think Jack had ideas, but he didn't, you know, he wasn't as forthcoming.
Yeah, because I know that Jack in the 60s gets some flack because I guess he got moved over to, you know, like Strange Adventures, and people say, okay, he ruined it. But in the 40s, when I read a lot of his dialogue, it's actually really good. He was really talented.
Yes, he was talented. He was absolutely talented.
Yeah. Irish Snap, he was the letterer that did a lot of the fonts for the titles. But you had some encounters with him, is that right?
I thought Irish Snap was I can't say adorable, but he was. He was just, he was so lovely and so professional. He had done the lettering for posters of silent movies. He goes back a long, long way. And I don't know where Jack and Harry Donnenfeld found him, but I have a feeling maybe he was working in the shop, you know, because they brought people over from their original shop. And I think he was one of them because he was ancient then, but he would sit down and he would, if you went in, and he would tell you stories if you wanted to hear them, you know, of the movie posters and things of that nature. Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
He was just a professional guy, and he was happy to have this job. A lot of people, they began to fire because they didn't know what to do either, to tell you the truth. So they fired several people that I liked very much in that bullpen, but Ira's place was secure.
So Arnold Drake, and were you friends with him?
Yes, I was.
I love his Doom Patrol and a lot of his older stuff from the 50s. So tell us about Arnold Drake a little.
Okay. Well, you know, he wrote the movie What Happened to Teddy Bear?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And his brother wrote Frank Sinatra's signature song. He was very proud of that.
I didn't know that part. Yeah, that's cool.
It was a very good year. I think that was the title.
Yeah.
He could write up a storm. He was just wonderful. He would come in and Bob Haney would come in, and they would sit in this little tiny closet, which was called the writer's room, the freelance writer's room, and they would knock out stuff together. I think Haney and Erwin had a lot of problems with people, with the editors. They did. Those were two people that might have had a lot of problems because they were big on ideas. And Haney would come in because he'd come in and knock out stories, and then he'd go back upstate to where he was living.
Now, Jack Miller, you know, you've mentioned him before, and obviously he was an influence on you, as you've mentioned that before. First, tell us, you know, you talked about like story structure and writing and banging out a good story. What did you learn from Jack that was important for you?
Jack taught me that you can't go on talking forever. You've got to get it done in 6 pages for a certain script. And he would ask me to plot it for him, so that I would learn how to plot a story in 6 pages. That's not easy, but you do it. In everything that you did there, you had to learn how to do it, and then you better keep it up.
So I've read a lot of interviews of people that were at DC in the 60s, and there was one that of Carmine that I read, and I just want to ask this to get your side of it, because he mentions you in one.
What did he say?
Yeah, exactly. What did he say? You tell me what that guy said.
What did he say?
Okay, but basically he was working on Batman. This is before he was publisher and all that. And then he said he was working in Jack Miller's office. He mentioned that you and Jack were having a romance, that Jack had to steal art to keep up with his drinking and his romantic life, and that Jack hated that Carmine was there cramping his style. Is any of this true? What's your view of this?
Jack did not drink.
Okay.
What Jack did with his money and his time is Jack's business. I was not having an affair with him.
Okay, there you go.
Jack was married with 2 children, and I was friendly with his daughter too. But Carmine, yes, he did come into the office, and yes, he was doing Batman. And he actually had this, he's a very tall man with a bald head. And,
True.
Well, I was there. Gee, that's so nice that he said that about me. Okay. And he sort of
there,
swag.
yeah. And I was like, really? Okay.
He's not the only one who has said that. So I was doing a Comic-Con someplace, and I introduced myself to someone, and that's the greeting I got. So
I see. So and that's basically not true, right? You're probably, maybe it sounds like, from what you're saying, if I'm correct about it, let me know, is that Jack Miller was influential. You guys did a lot of co-writing and writing and editing together.
3 screen treatments together.
Did 3 screen treatments, and then people looked at that and probably made assumptions that weren't true. Is that basically it?
Everybody's entitled to their assumption.
Right.
Alex, I just want to add that I've read things that Barbara said about Carmine, and they were all flattering, although some of them were honest, in that she talked very strongly about his art and how great he was, which we all agree on.
Can't take that away.
Right.
But that he took on too many hats, and he was overwhelmed by where he wanted to have his hand in everything. And it got, as he became art director, it got a little bit out of control. And that was the only thing I've ever read that was negative that she said about him.
Well, I will say that too, because he was doing romance books too. And the editor turned out to be Joe Orlando. He took over the romance book.
Right, exactly. After Jack died, basically, right? And Jack died of cancer in 1970, right?
Yes, around 1970, yes.
2 Bobs, Bob Kanigher or Robert Kanigher. What was your impression of him?
He was a little, let me just tell you again, they don't know what to do with me, the guys. So around me, a lot of the men sort of clammed up. They didn't want to talk that much. But Jack told me he was a character to begin with. That's all I can say. He would lose his temper. He would do things like that. He was the war books. Was he the war book?
Yeah.
I know Jack wrote some of those books, so I mean stories for them. And who's the other person?
And then Bob Kane. Did you ever have any interaction with Bob Kane?
Bob Kane. Bob Kane was a tall, terrific guy. He didn't take anything from anybody because he didn't have to be there on a regular basis. So when he came in, it was getting his scripts in and, working with the editors. And he and Erwin Drake were really close when he came in. So they stuck together. As a matter of fact, the writers, that little closet, the writer's room, they gave that room to they got rid of it and gave it to the secretary of the guy that came over, you know, so people really knew, wow, where am I, you know, they changed a lot.
So would you say Bob Kane, when he'd walk in, he was just kind of like just this tall, charming guy? Is that what was going on with Bob Kane? Like, is that the aura he would give off?
As I said many times, had the mouth of the Joker. He really did. He must have drawn it from himself. And when he was there, he was a lucky guy. Mm-hmm. He had a contract, and the poor guys who created stuff didn't have contracts. So he was protected. His intellectual property was protected. Right. I don't know who else had such a contract, but that's a tremendous phase of law now.
So did all of this become less fun for you after Miller died, and is that why you left? Or
no, I left because everybody who told me to get married, I followed their advice.